right, guys, welcome back. This is Total Disclosure. My name's Ty, and I'm the host of the podcast. I created this platform to engage with like-minded people, and today I'm joined by Dan Zetterstrom, who is just that. Not only is he the co-producer of That UFO podcast, but he is the founder and researcher for UAP Media UK. He was featured in the Phenomenology documentary series and Ancient Aliens. He is also the founder and creative lead at 33 Ounce Creative. And before we get into that, guys, make sure to hit that like button on YouTube and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. If you're watching or listening on Spotify, make sure to follow the show and leave a review. It truly, truly helps. That goes to the same thing for Apple Podcasts. Review the show and make sure to follow it and ring that notification tab so you don't miss any of our uploads. We upload the podcast on Sunday typically, but lately we've been doing a couple podcasts a week. I am working on a schedule that's a little bit more concise, and we'll be talking about that on a later date. Let's get into it, guys. We have such a fun conversation coming up for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Here's Dan Zetterstrom. My man, what's up? It's been a long time since we've spoken. I think I messaged you probably a couple months ago, and we spoke briefly. And you know, this past couple months has just been crazy for you and for the community in general. But I'm super glad to have you on today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And yeah, you're right. It's been a long time coming. I think we spoke just before Christmas, and then I've been traveling, so it's just been hard to kind of connect. And then this was like serendipity, you know, it just lined up, and I managed to reach out yesterday, and you had a free spot. So yeah, it's great. And it's such an insane time in the UFO community at the moment. I would go as far to say as that the UFO subject has never been so widely known and popular, and more people are getting switched onto it every day because the USA just keeps shooting down unidentified flying objects.
It's funny that you mentioned that specifically because disclosure, UFO, UAP Twitter, UFO Twitter, these things have been trending for about, a week, 2 weeks now. And it's kind of wild to see to where we were, let's say, put ourselves in the 40s and 50s, right? Where, I mean, this thing was just emerging as a, not an issue, but it was emerging. The topic was becoming more discussed, talked about, and seen in some cases. So from where it's, started to where we are now, do you think we're in the process of some sort of disclosure?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure if it's a controlled dissemination or what. I know that Lou and Chris kind of sat down and thought about how they were going to roll this out and tell this kind of story. But there seems to be more going on now. It's gotten away from those initial leaders, and the senators are picking it up and just running with this because it's a national security issue. That was a really great angle to kind of speak to them with, and it just keeps giving dividends. It's amazing to think where it's going to go, because once science gets involved, this subject starts splitting into its constituent parts. And, we're going to have people looking at kind of like exobiology and things like that, and just subjects that don't exist today. And for me, that's where, the rubber really meets the road. And I'm excited to get to that place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For anyone that, let's pretend for a second that nobody knows who you are. How did you get into this topic? What led you to being here right now?
Sure. So my kind of whole life is, again, serendipitous. There's this synchronicity aspect to the whole thing. Ever since I was a kid, I've been into this. I can't remember if it was the X-Files that did it or if I was interested before the X-Files, but I was given an award in primary school, which was the E.T. of Palmerston School. So I was really into this subject back then, enough for the teachers to even poke fun. But I look back, and that's kind of funny that the teachers were poking fun at the stigma, and then I kind of went away from the subject, and I went into kind of creative things, and I studied chemistry and physics, and moved through university studying film. And then all along that path, I was learning to play guitar. And the reason I picked that up was Tom DeLonge. So I tried to learn that in primary school, and it just didn't stick for me. And then I found Blink-182 one day, and I was like, oh, I need to learn to play this. I love the energy. So I started learning that and kind of followed along with Tom as he was making his, his music, his movies, but also going into the UFO subject, because he would just, as they were touring, he would just be reading UFO books in vans and talking about it in interviews and talking to experiences as he toured around. And a lot of people, think that his interest started with To the Stars or just before, and that's not the case at all. It's been as long as I can remember. And then as I kind of left university, I was really getting into the kind of ancient civilization side of things. And then that path kind of brought me all the way back around. And then Tom DeLonge did To the Stars, and everything just kind of crashed together. And I was like, oh, all of these disparate interests of mine are actually all to do with the same thing. And, I started my Twitter account that was UFO focused. The pandemic hit, and in lockdown, that's where I met Andy, and we started doing the podcast together. Then we met Dave and Graham and everyone, and we did UAP Media as well, and started, writing to politicians in the UK and just trying to help give them good information to use and be informed with, and I guess that kind of leads us to today. It's been a roller coaster. If you'd have asked me 20 years ago if this is where I'd be, I wouldn't have guessed it, but couldn't be happier. This is such an intriguing mystery that it needs everyone. We all have a puzzle piece.
And I think everyone on the planet has a vested interest in this topic. Even if they don't necessarily say it or think about it, I think we all have a vested interest in, are we alone in the universe? Or, is there other life, intelligent life, that could potentially even be visiting here? I don't think there's a person on the planet who wouldn't be interested in knowing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Some people kind of shut the conversation away because they like their 9 to 5. They kind of, the steady family life. And I get that. But eventually this thing is going to come in like a steam train and just, hit us all over. So this kind of slow drip disclosure that we're getting now, I think is kind of, I won't use the word designed because it implies that there's a group of shady people kind of rolling this out. Right. But slow and steady wins the race, essentially. And when we get to the point where it's just like, oh yeah, there's something other here, and it's matter of fact, people will just kind of roll their eyes and get on with it. We're making sure, I think, that people aren't going to rush out and steal all the toilet paper again.
I couldn't have said that better myself. There is definitely, with I think even Michio Kaku has said it. The burden used to be on the experiencer or the UFO, the person who saw the UFO and then is telling the story, or abductions, whatever. It used to be on the witness to kind of give that proof, but the burden is shifted towards the authority. It's their turn to either say it's true or not true. There's enough evidence out there to convict a murderer 20 times over. So the burden of proof is now shifted. And I think, with what we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks, the media, the Pentagon, the White House, they're using this term UAP pretty loosely at this point. And I think, it's by design. I hate to say it like you didn't, but I think it is by design.
I think there's a subtle kind of middle ground, isn't there? You don't necessarily need a bunch of shady people that people don't know the names of kind of designing this rollout. But I think certainly people or politicians take advantage of situations that come up. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing now. UAP has entered the vernacular in a huge way. Oxford have like their word of the year. I'd be very surprised if it's not unidentified anomalous phenomena at the end of this year.
Right. Oh my God, imagine. That'd be awesome.
It would be such like a watermark, right? Like just how far it's spread. And you mentioned earlier about how the subject is really popular, and I don't think it's an accident that that's happened, because we've got kind of the age of communication now, where we can get everything online that we need. We can, if Roswell happened now, you know, we wouldn't be relying on that one statement being put out and retracted. So much more would go on, as we've seen in the past week, which is kind of like a little microcosm and a Roswell 2.0, you could call it, depending on which side of the fence you sit as to what happened.
Yeah, I called it the reverse Roswell.
Reverse Roswell, I like that. I like that. But that kind of, you know, the kind of the broad strokes of it, you know, something shut down, we don't know what it is, the government aren't showing us, then they're showing us this balloon wreckage, and in this case, we don't even have wreckage for 3 of the objects.
You know,
so
to interject there, why do you think, now we have up-to-date footage of the war in Ukraine, right? I mean, there are reporters that, you know, they're in the midst of battle. There's, you know, missiles being shot down, and we have video footage of it. Why has, if the United States government is very adamant that they have shot down these objects, why are we getting, you know, any footage or evidence to kind of, you know, if they want to keep people in that thought process that these are just balloons or spycraft, why is there no evidence? Why aren't they backing this up with evidence?
So we've got a few different scenarios. Either it's exactly what they say it is, and, you know, they kind of blew these things out of the sky and they disintegrated them, and therefore, you know, there's nothing to show. Or they're humiliated because they blew up some hobbyist balloon with a $400,000 missile, and they're like, we can't, no, just don't show them SpongeBob SquarePants being blown up by a Sidewinder. Or it's something more spectacular and something that would raise a lot of questions. But I think the way that they've done it is drawing questions as opposed to kind of saying, you know, proving to people that this is something prosaic. So there are so many different people in the community. So, for example, like Andy and I did an episode this week talking about this whole situation. And we had so many different kinds of feedback. Some people saying, oh, you're just parroting the mainstream. Other people saying, you know, great, you admitted they're prosaic. I trust this podcast more now. Other people kind of saying, no, it was definitely aliens. You know, this event happened and this woman filmed, and, you know, they'll send video clips and things.
The typical ones, yeah.
Yeah, but it's funny how the same situation is interpreted in so many different ways. And that's really, I guess, why, you know, the Columbia series ended up being called Phenomenology, because we all bring a different point of view to any experience that we have, and that informs it. In Columbia, there was we solved a case where there was a blue light, and it was a stormy night, and there was basically a blue light kind of flashing down in the valley, and it was given to us as a video of a UFO, and we went and we interviewed the witnesses, and there were about, I want to say 8 or 9 of them. Each witness pointed in a different direction as to where it happened. So we kind of had to work out for ourselves where the event happened. You know, they were kind of on this vantage point overlooking the valley. But they all had different interpretations of it as well. Some people thought it was like a police car and it was flashing lights. Someone else came up with the idea that it was a quantum bit of information from another universe. And, you know, that's so loaded, right? Like there's so many ideas in that one sentence that it's like,
how did you come up with that one?
From a multiverse? Like that's kind of exponentially bigger than just aliens from another planet. Yeah. So we all kind of bring this baggage, and there were some other events in the valley where people thought it was like Mary Magdalene. Some people will call it the spirits of the indigenous tribes there, the Muisca tribes that had been there for ages. And it was really interesting to experience all of these different kind of inputs. And it really took a whole bunch of us to kind of figure them out, because, you know, each one of us had our own bias as well, I guess. Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. That's just being human, right? That's a human thing is, you know, we aren't always the best at being neutral or not bringing our own thought processes into things. So, and you know, South America, they're much more open about this phenomena, right? This phenomena. Absolutely. They're not as afraid to talk about it publicly. There's not such a huge stigma. You know, do you feel that the world is headed that way, or do you think that there'll always be some sort of stigma attached to this subject until it's, you know, without a shadow of a doubt, we know exactly what's happening?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because we kind of have what's known as the low information zone with this subject. You know, we don't have a lot of data to kind of fill it in. And I think there are 2 types of people in the community. There are ones who kind of gather the data and we're kind of going towards a conclusion. And then there are other ones that live in that low information zone. So no matter, you know, if we identified a species that was coming here in a UFO and landing and taking people, they would insist that there's something else still in that low information zone that is outside of that. So yeah, it's hard to kind of... Sorry, remind me of the question one more time.
I was trying to think of it too, to be honest. Oh, will there always be the stigma attached?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I think in that sense, there will always be stigma with the people who kind of live in that low information zone, basically. But not to disparage them, because that low information zone is kind of where a lot of mysteries lay. You know, that would be where the giant squids of yesteryear were, you know, and now we know them as a scientific fact, right?
Right. And you know, I came across you and Kurt when you did the episode with Stephen Greer. Now, Stephen Greer is, you know, he was one of these people that I followed for many years before I ever publicly came out and, you know, did the show and kind of told people that I've always, you know, believed in this phenomenon and I've seen it with my own eyes. Sure. I was a big supporter of Dr. Greer for many years. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that without him, this subject wouldn't be as far as it is today. Sure. But over the past, I'd say maybe 10 years, he's definitely found where the money is and kind of parked his car there. With that episode, you know, I criticized you and Kurt for maybe going into that episode with a bias, with wanting to get something out of it. Because, and I think this party and Dr. Greer on his own agenda, he wanted to get on that show to be in front of more people and to get his message across. And I think, where do you stand on that narrative of that, you know, the government knows much more, pretty much the most that you can know, but are hiding it from the population in some sort of dark, mysterious, like X-Files way? Because I know you tried to ask questions during that episode, but it was mainly just Greer kind of talking for 2 hours.
Yeah, he has so much information and so much experience because of what he's been through. And you're right, you know, up to the kind of National Press Club meetings and things like that, he's done amazing work, and he spread the bug and the intrigue. You know, he was weaponizing curiosity before Jeremy Corbell kind of came up with that phrase. Yeah. So he's done incredible work. But
imagine if 9/11 didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because his project was like 2 months before 9/11, that National Press Club event. And then, I mean, 9/11 just, you know, obviously took over current events and news and all that. And, you know, that press club event, you know, kind of people forgot about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Stephen is planning to do another kind of press club thing sometime this year, which I think will be fantastic. You know, where the world's in a slightly different place now. And although there's all this crazy stuff going on, I think there's a lot of people who would tune into that, officials-wise, who wouldn't have done, you know, back in the day when he did it. So it's been really interesting kind of following. And his CE5 stuff, you know, Payne's go in the desert and kind of do that kind of stuff. That's really intriguing to me because, you know, I've gone out under the stars. You know, there was a point where I was kind of really into the Stephen Greer documentaries and believed everything that came out of his mouth. And I kind of had to go through that kind of growing process. You know, he's a very good on-ramp for the subject. But when you start kind of exploring it for yourself, you kind of start seeing the subtler ways that things are happening. So, for example, the CE5 stuff, I couldn't give you an answer as to what that was. I've heard so many different kind of interpretations of it. You know, just to kind of, long story short, my sighting was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I saw something going over that I thought was a satellite after doing CE5, as Greer calls it. And then that light stopped at kind of the high point of the sky. Yeah. Just stopped dead. And kind of got my intrigue. And then when it had my intrigue, it started falling towards the horizon like a leaf on the wind, just swooping
right
all the way down. And I was just like, this just, we don't make things like this. What is this? You know? And then as it got to the horizon, it just shot from south to north. And I was under this huge swath of sky. So, you know, my view wasn't limited. And it cleared the sky in about 2 seconds.
Jeez.
And I was just left absolutely gobsmacked. So, you know, my experience with CE5 there's something there, but I couldn't tell you what it is. I've heard so many different theories from alien visitors to, and people rightfully say, why would a group of aliens from Orion be like, oh yeah, we're going to go by Dan's watch here and we're going to be there at 9 p.m. on Friday for him, to kind of it being our latent psychic ability. And that's why it pops up directly where we're looking and when we're looking, as opposed to anything else. So yeah, the Greer stuff has been really interesting to kind of go through. And it's not just Greer that does the CE5 stuff. You've got like Mission Rama and people like that. And it comes under, different terms. So I'd suggest, as with all things, people should go out and explore and just try it and see what comes up. But it's so important to understand what is in the sky. And we have these amazing smartphones now that you can just get an app on and you can see all the satellites, or most of them anyway, not the classified ones. And the constellations and the International Space Station, so you can see exactly what's up there and not kind of, fool yourself. But it's an amazing learning.
You can eliminate most prosaic things with a couple apps. Flight radar, satellite tracker, and I use Night Sky.
Oh yeah, Night Sky is a great one.
You where all the planets and stuff are. So that's what I use.
Do you have an iPhone, by the way?
I do.
Cool. I'm going to send you something after we finish talking. There's an app called Shortcuts that lets you do like macros, and you put in a bunch of steps, and it's just a one button press instead of a lot of button presses. And the macro I built is essentially, I saw something in the sky and it pulls the temperature, the clarity of the air, the pressure, your height, your location, your coordinates, and it just kind of puts them all in notes for me. And then I just add a picture and my description. So it's really handy for doing that. So yeah, I'll send that to you, and feel free, if you want to put the link in the description to the show, happy for you to share that.
Yeah, and I've been asking for something like that, because I can't develop an app. That's not me. But I'm like, is it too much to ask, like, for something similar to what you just described, that kind of puts everything in one place, so you don't have to scour across multiple apps? Because most people, i.e. you, and most people I know, they don't want to be fumbling through apps while potentially that thing's in the sky.
Exactly.
Observe as much detail as possible. So, and these iPhones, I don't even bother trying to get pictures of anything anymore, because they're meant for selfies. Like, it's meant for something right here, not for something.
Selfies, cats, friends, castles.
Try to take a picture of a full moon. It looks like a star in light years away. So
and Andy sent me a link to the newest Samsung Galaxy, the S23, I think it is, and that has like a moon capture mode, and it adjusts the exposure, and you get a nice close up of the moon, and that's all well and great. But how many people on Earth are going to have that brand new specific smartphone? Right, we're going to have to wait about 20 more years until that technology is everywhere.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I'm a big Sony guy. I love their Alpha series. I have 3 of them.
Oh yeah, they're great.
The Sony Alphas, and those even unless you have this, the long, God, I can't remember exactly what the lens is, but it's a long lens that allows you to capture.
Like a telephoto.
Yes, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. And it's and unless you have that specific lens, it's really going to be hard for you to capture anything in the sky, especially if it's moving. So, again, it's really hard for people to get, photographic evidence that's going to be the nail in the coffin. So, a lot of people are waiting for that smoking gun, when I hate to say it, it's not going to come from an iPhone. It's just simply not. Unless the thing's 20 feet in front of you, landed on the ground. And
even then, is your first reaction to coming across a saucer landed on the ground in front of you to be like, let me pull this out and just take a selfie?
Right.
I'd love for something like the Ariel school landing to happen now, because I think there would be kids who would pop out their phones and just be like, cool, I'm going to live stream this on TikTok. And we just see it. Or the Phoenix Lights, for example. That would be everywhere. We wouldn't just get that one bit of footage that was kind of ropey from the news. We would have so many little pieces that we could put together. Maybe that's why that kind of stuff doesn't happen these days.
Well, that's what that was my great. You kind of answered it already now, but a lot of skeptics, people like Stephen Greenstreet now. I can't even believe I call him a skeptic now, but he is skeptic. Mick West, these guys like that. All say that kind of thing. Is like, okay, well, if the Ariel school, if the landing at oh God, what Air Force Base was it? Where
we're talking where like the deal was made. Holloman, yeah.
Yeah, Holloman Air Force Base. If these kind of events happen today, or why aren't they happening today? Why is it only when people didn't have cell phones or a way to capture it, and now all of a sudden, nothing like this happens? And they like to point to these things that this human way of thinking that if I can't really explain this question. This is really bad.
I think I know what you're getting at. Just like why essentially why doesn't that happen these days?
Why don't we have a mass landing story of 2018?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, totally understand you. I mean, if we were going to other planets and we were swooping up animals and things like that, the second that they cottoned on to what we were doing, we would change our approach, right? We wouldn't just keep doing the same thing. And that's probably the same kind of thing here. When we spoke to Randall Nickerson, who directed the Aerial Phenomena documentary, he said something really curious, that he was kind of, his interest was piqued by the idea that event happened so long ago, so that once we got to where we are now in the conversation, it kind of starts bleeding into that kind of consciousness and the story and the ideas that everybody has. So you've got to wonder, is that why children are targeted? So that they grow up and they see this in a very kind of particular way. And I mean, hearts and mind, that's how you win, right?
Could you just kind of put me on a path here? So could all of that could this process, because I mean, look at this day and age. We're all pretty much molded to the idea that we're not alone.
Sure.
Could that have been the game plan from these landings, right? These conditioning of people, mass amounts of people, the Phoenix Lights you mentioned, the aerial school, Rendlesham Forest. I mean, you name it. Could all of those events be leading to this point to condition the human race to look past what they don't know, or to not be afraid of the unknown? Because I feel like many people are. If they can't control it, if they don't understand it, they're naturally afraid of it. That could be interesting.
Yeah, I think that I'm with you on that thought pattern, and the way that the visitors seem to work. And I say visitors as if, they might not have been here for thousands of years longer than us. The others will say, big O. The way they seem to work is in a sense, there are all these kind of weird things about time. So like in the aerial school landing, apparently you're being ran across a field and then like reset and then did the same motion again. So there's all this kind of, and the tic tac as well, finding the cat point and things like that. There are all these ideas that maybe they don't experience time in the same way that we do. So if that's the case, the tic tac from the 50s, if you were inside that tic tac, for all we know, they went from the 50s to the encounter with David Fravor in seconds. That was a linear event for them. Whereas to us, it looked like, 50, 60 years apart. And that could also be an explanation for as to why their technology doesn't seem to advance,
and I've said this many times, do you agree with the notion that we need to stop looking at this from a human perspective?
100%. At the moment, we look for life as we know it. And I get why we do that, because we know that life is on Earth, therefore the conditions are right here, therefore all the kind of different life that springs up here is kind of reminiscent of what could be out there in the universe. But I think we're going to, when you really sit down and look at it, we know very little about the universe that we live in. And so I think when we come to terms with this, it's going to be a realization that life as we don't know it is where the solution lies to this. We keep looking in places like, volcanoes and under the Arctic ice and expecting no life, but finding life there nonetheless. So it just seems that life is persistent. And really, when we step back, the reason that I did the interview with Dr. Michelle Fournet about whale song like a little while back, that was really interesting, because she was looking at whales as an older civilization than us that could communicate and everything like that. And I think kind of a change in perspective on the 8 million aliens that we live on this planet with is going to come along with our expansion of the idea of what life can be, what constitutes life, and finding life.
And that leads us to a couple different points about, like, would you know, artificial intelligence, if it advances far enough where it can think for itself and it can problem solve and it can adapt to situations, is that essentially life? You know, are we essentially the creators of this new life? And is this the path that we were meant to be on? Like, are we meant to do this all? Like, what? And I think that's what I love about this topic and this subject in general, because it forces you to ask these really deep questions.
100%.
It's so amazing because, I mean, these are things that, you know, maybe 5 years ago I didn't really care to ask, or maybe I didn't want to know. You know, what would be the end game, I guess, and that would be my mind of why are we here? It can't be to build iPhones. That's not our purpose in this world.
It's interesting, right? We have this distinction between created by nature and created by man, when really you could argue that anything we create is created by nature because nature created us.
Right.
It's just how conscious that process of evolution was. And really, when you kind of step back and you look at, you know, all the branches of the tree of evolution and how it went, there's no way in hell that it made us and went, I'm happy, we're good. You know, like it kept going.
Perfect.
Exactly. Like at some point it would have gone, oh, these squishy bodies aren't really that great. You know, like maybe we can get rid of those. And then you kind of follow that logic along and you end up thinking, okay, well, what does a human look like without a body? Like, could we still say it's human if it kind of thinks in the same way as us? And it gives me chills to think about it, because it just goes straight to Lou Elizondo, you know, insisting it's mankind's, not mankind. Recently, we found, I think it's Lee Berger, the archaeologist, found that there was a species of human that actually had access to and deliberately controlled and used fire in their everyday life. And we thought that we were the first to do that.
Right. I saw
that. And the reason
actually
we thought we were the first to do that is because we have bigger brains than our ancestors. But that proves that bigger brains don't lead to fire. Therefore, kind of it's upended, you know, almost everything we thought about it. And it'll take a little while to permeate. But it was really funny how that was discovered, because Lee was saying that they'd been studying these caves for years and years and years. And then one day they decided to look up. And when they looked up, they saw all this soot on the ceiling, and realized, oh, crap, you know, they've been using fire. But just the fact that it was look up when we're outside of those caves looking up and finding more mysteries, and it tickled me a little bit. You know, the universe has a good sense of humor.
I would say so. I honestly, I would say that myself. It's kind of, it makes me chuckle. But you said earlier that you became fascinated with the ancient civilization and these ancient civilization, this history of let's call it our origin story.
Sure.
Why did this interest you? And because a lot of people think the UFO phenomenon started in 1947 or the 1940s, let's call it 45, 47, but it didn't. We know that, you know, even Christopher Columbus may have seen a UFO or something, you know, of the sort. The Romans with the flying, the flaming shields, right? So each civilization kind of has their own viewpoint, right? The Native Americans and the Sky people, all these cultures talk about these beings or these craft that they saw in the sky flying. What part of that interests you? And, you know, do you think that it's just lore and stories, or do you think there's more to it?
To be honest, I think there's more to it. You know, people don't tend to spend energy unless they're getting something out of it. And I understand the kind of, you know, the subtleties of referring to the elements as gods and things like that. So sometimes there are places where people assert, oh, you know, they're talking about aliens, when no, they're talking about the wind and the weather and things like that.
Right.
But back in those days, there was an acceptance of the mystery of the universe. And to go back to that idea of, you know, if we were on another planet looking at something else, we would probably, you know, if there were a group of people who were a bit more amenable and kind of, you know, making offerings and things like that and lighting fires on the ground to kind of attract our attention, we'd probably start giving them that attention. And if you look at the kind of the knowledge that gets passed down through, you know, verbal stories, there are stories about meteor strikes hitting the planet and kind of wiping us out. There was one story I heard where it was an Aboriginal one where supposedly along with these meteor strikes came a what would be the way to describe it? A kind of a crystalline ship that exploded and left debris. And it's kind of hard to prove that that was a ship, but we have the debris, and we know that the debris is kind of, it doesn't quite fit other meteors that we've kind of spoken about. So you have all these different angles again from these ancient civilizations. And then, we go into the kind of ideas that when you look around the world, it sure seems like they were using a lot of the same ideas to construct temples and pyramids. And I forget what the term is. It begins with a Z. It's the stepped kind of structure. Ziggurat, I think it is.
Yeah.
That's it. And so, it seems like there's a connected story in our past that we haven't quite put the pieces together for yet. And that was one of my main reasons for at the moment I'm currently in Mexico. My whole reason for being here is to go to these ancient sites and see them for myself.
Yes.
And it's been harrowing and humbling because we hear all these stories about them. We see them on TV, but I'm telling you, you cannot appreciate the scale of these societies and how much we kind of just go, it's a tomb, without really knowing. So for example, Chichen Itza, very well-known kind of ancient ruin. Excuse me a second. So Chichen Itza is a really well-known ancient ruin, and everyone kind of, it's something everyone visits when they come to Mexico. But not many people realize that most of that site has been reconstructed by archaeologists who didn't really have a map to go on. So we're kind of, making things in the dark, essentially. And I was disappointed to find out that there's a sky observation kind of astronomy tower there. Really? And it's like this little dome structure, but we have no proof that it existed like that. All we know is they looked at the stars. And so
we built what we thought.
Precisely, you've got it. And I think it's so important to mention what you mentioned, that we have our own paradigms that we look through. We have a lens. So at the moment, we can look and we know about quantum stuff, so we know how tiny things get. We can look out into the universe with James Webb and see how big things get. Mm-hmm. But back in the day, they couldn't really appreciate that kind of stuff, yet they were talking about the same things.
And constructing. I mean, God, it blows my mind, because these pyramids, ziggurats, step pyramids, I mean, they're all built with absolute precision. And, astrological, they had to have real advanced mathematics, real advanced astronomy to even begin. I could not do something like that. I could not plan something so perfect. And I'm from the year 2023, right?
People forget, I think, that, if everything went away, we're not making one of these again for a long time, because there are so many different advancements that go into that, and so many different people who focus on their fields, that it comes together and creates something like that. And that kind of pursuit of precision is something that, we can now look back and appreciate because we have recorded history. But in terms of, what they had way back when, there are a lot of questions that come up as to, like you say, how do you align something perfectly to magnetic north? It's really intriguing. And I'll also add that every site that I've been to, I've worked out my compass, and now I just kind of assume it's, one side is northeast, southwest, and that the temples are made that way. And literally, I've yet to find a single site here that isn't aligned in that way. And they're all, all over the map, and it's incredible. Like there was certainly a through line between them all, where they were interested in these cardinal directions. They were interested in looking at the sky. They were interested in reflecting the stars and talking about what was there. And not to throw shade on anyone that lives in cities, but it blows my mind to think of what kind of world we would live in now if everybody could see the Milky Way every night and be humbled by it.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sight. And just like you said, I live in the city. I live right in Boston. So I really don't get to see the sky the way it is. But then you go up to like Maine, and you see it, and you're like, I was just in LA, and we went to the observatory, and I mean, it just takes your breath away. And I mean, it does something to you. It gives you an appreciation of what our place is in this universe, and just, I don't know, opens you up to the idea that
that's so True. Sorry, literally, as you were saying it, I was just thinking about the overview effect that astronauts get when they're in the space station, and they kind of say, you know, we see how fragile our planet is and how connected we all are.
Yeah.
But you're right, like seeing the Milky Way from Earth kind of does the same thing, but while our feet's on the ground.
And it's because you start to realize how small we actually are. And you know, and I think what people have to realize is just because just say we find intelligent life, you know, Sirius B, wherever we find it, that doesn't mean that we're not special. Like, that doesn't take away from the uniqueness of the human race. We are not just you know, we might be a microcosm on the grand scheme of things, but we're special in our own right. And, you know, life is precious no matter where it is. And I think people need to realize this and not be so afraid of the possibility that we're not on the top of the food chain, that we're not even close to top. It's a humbling experience. I think everyone's going to have that conversation with themselves and truly ask the question, you know, by us finding life, what does that really affect in your daily life? Not much, right? It's not going to affect you going to work every day. It's not going to affect, you know, cooking dinner for your family. What it's going to affect is how you perceive yourself. And I think we're overdue for a little slap on the ass.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like, the things like this hold up a mirror to us, and it will end up asking the question, what does it mean for us to be human? And it'll take us a while to figure that out. You know, people see us as kind of warmongering, but really that's just a select group of people who get to make decisions for the rest of the countries, and they all kind of engage in this stuff. Most people you meet are very...
There it is.
Bear with me.
I got there's an outtake. For anyone who doesn't know, that's housekeeping. I think you muted yourself. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, cool. What was I? Hold on.
I don't even remember, man. Oh, what it means to be human.
Yeah, that's it. Most people that you meet out in the world are just trying to get a little happiness and get by. You know, they're not looking to take what their neighbor has. They're not looking to look across the ocean and say, we're better than you, or, you know,
kind of oils.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that would probably become a more mainstream approach. You know, like you say, we would be humbled. But the idea as well that there's something unique about us that another form of life wouldn't have is also really interesting. Mm-hmm. You know, as I mentioned earlier, whales, one of the oldest civilizations on the planet, really intelligent creatures. They don't make art, not in the same way we do, you know, and art is all about creating empathy between us. You know, like a video game is an empathy machine, for example, or a movie or anything like that. It's all about kind of communicating our shared experience. And it boggles my mind to think, you know, what other species have that we wouldn't have. And yeah, I mean, personally, I can't wait to find out what other life is out there, how they see us, how they've seen our history, and how we can see their development as well. We're very... Sorry, go on.
No, finish up.
I was just going to say what you said earlier about us being kind of very anthropocentric in our thinking is bang on. You know, we say, oh, why wouldn't they land at the White House? Politics is a very human idea. You know, there's no guarantee that any other form of life out there has the same kind of hierarchy. So we really need to get kind of out of this box of thinking that way. And it's really hard to, because our biology is made to think that way, because this is the small slice of the universe in which we can survive.
Yeah, and that's spot on. And because the reason I say this is because we can't take people ask, oh, why, you know, why didn't you, you know, why aren't they just, why would they hide from us? Why would they just, you know, fly over, you know, every once in a while, maybe take a cow here and there and do some crop circles? It's like, well, I mean, maybe we wouldn't do those things, but that's not to say that they wouldn't, right? We need to stop looking at this from a human perspective on what we would do, how we would handle it. Those are good starting points, but we need a direct apprehension on, you know, we need to directly apprehend for ourselves the answer to the solution, and we can't just base it off of what we know about ourselves. Because if we continue to look for us out there, we're not going to find it.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. You know, we could be a small permutation of another species that were dropped off here by microbes on a meteor and developed uniquely, you know?
Exactly.
And they could look at us as strangely as we look at them. But it's interesting to think about the electromagnetic spectrum, what exists out in the universe. You know, we say that there's maybe like 95% of the universe that we think of as just dark matter and dark energy. Yep. That's stuff. That could be life, you know, for all we know.
We have no idea.
Exactly. And the chances of it recognizing us as life as well are just as limited. So everyone could be going about their days and all around each other and just not know about it.
What do you give to the idea that could these things like Tic Tacs, right, that move in these crazy ways, right, back and forth, side to side, like Commander Fravor talks about, like a ping pong ball, right? Sure. Life as we know it definitely would not be able to survive in such a condition, doing such radical maneuvers. We know, and again, I'm kind of basing this off the human perspective, which is what we just said not to do, but we send like Ingenuity and the Mars rover, right? These things move at 1 mile per hour, you know, very slowly, but collect a lot of information. We have the craft Ingenuity now, that thing's flying around, but it's not doing crazy maneuvers. Could these be probes of some sort? And, you know, down the line after, you know, maybe they're waiting for us to be a little bit more ready. What do you give to that idea that these are unmanned probes?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and it gives us a solution to how that moves in that way. It also, like you said, is anthropocentric. So in a way, we kind of have to go, okay, cool, that's a good idea. We'll pop that up there on the shelf because we do that for every reason, you know, intents purpose. It could be true, but I like to kind of flip it and think, okay, well, say, for example, there was a spacefaring civilization, right? They didn't develop on a planet. They developed in zero gravity.
Oh, wow, yeah.
They would move in a way that we don't. Their ability to fly in an atmosphere wouldn't have developed like ours did. So they wouldn't be making planes in the same way that we do. They probably would have dropped a probe into the ocean first, looked at life in the ocean, started reflecting that because they knew that could, you know, they'd survive if they did that. Right. And then that kind of brings up the idea of, you know, craft looking like manta ray and things like that, like the Roswell craft was said to look like. Then those guys have to build pressure vessels for under the ocean. So then they're kind of doing the opposite. So instead of going into vacuum from a denser place, they would be moving into...
denser place into...
like a slightly less dense place, but still atmosphere. And so you could have a whole different effect on how that development, you know, produces the machine that they're using. And water essentially as well, you know, the idea of the Tic Tac just being filled with water and there being a life in there, you know, that water would dampen the inertia that we were seeing. So the way that they use it could be totally different to us.
Right. That's actually a really great point. Wow. Yeah, that's, I mean, I always thought, now don't get me wrong, I do not think that they're all unmanned. Sure. Unmanned in the sense that there's no being inside. But sure. Because I tend to believe that, you know, like things like the aerial school, I tend to believe that happened.
Sure.
So we know that beings came out, like, and the Holloman footage, right? They say 2 beings stepped out. So, I mean, if you're under that belief, then you know, maybe things like the Tic Tac are probes, but maybe there are bigger ships, different civilizations all coming here at once, right? We don't know. It's not just one civilization. You know, we can't really confirm that, but if I had to guess, it's not just one civilization that's visiting us.
I'd say if one civilization is visiting us, we kind of have to open the floodgates and be like, okay, there could be thousands.
Because that's what I get tricked up on a lot with this topic, is kind of talking like it's real, like it's absolute fact, when we really don't know. We don't even know if Roswell really happened technically, right? Like, we can talk like it's true, but at the end of the day, we just don't really know. There's a lot of conflicting reports, you know, in all of these cases.
It would be so cool to be able to go back to when Roswell happened, be in the location, and even if I couldn't see the crash myself, just see how the information was disseminated, because it's always a lot more subtle than the myth that kind of gets built, right? And the shoot downs over the past few weeks have been really interesting, because we're going to see how that myth develops now in real time.
Well, that's what I said. That's what I said. I said, I really want to pay attention to how the crash retrieval goes. How do they implement procedures? Do they lock down blocks of cities like they did in Virginia? How are we going about this? And because it's kind of like a case study on how crash retrievals are handled. Because we've heard about crash retrievals for UFOs and stuff, and how, you know, people say that the military just shows up, right? They basically block always into the crash. All of them are blocked off, and it's, you know, how we've heard it happen, and how we've heard that they do these retrievals. Does it line up with how we're handling this situation right now?
Yeah, 100%. And it goes back to that, sorry, earlier when you asked me this question when we were talking about Greer, I kind of didn't answer it, but it goes back to that idea of there being a shady group of people who have been controlling this since, you know, the 30s, 40s.
Right.
And what we've seen this past week is either the government hiding something from us, or the government being completely incompetent, right?
Yeah.
And one or the other is true, but then it doesn't mean that you couldn't have a few people that knew the secret back in Roswell, formed a little, you know, a group of folks studying it with all the resources, and set up with a financial institution that would be able to provide those resources on a worldwide scale, right. Which to me is probably, you know, someone from the City of London or something like that, like where all the old money is.
Yeah.
And like that, once you even get, you know, let that group study the craft that they retrieved for 20 years. That group, even if it's 5 people, is now what we refer to as a breakaway civilization.
Yep.
Because they don't just understand the craft better than us, they understand reality better than us, because their understanding of physics is so much further down the line. They essentially got a boost. So we don't necessarily need, you know, when people say breakaway civilization or, you know, dark government, we think of like, you know, these kind of
100 dark, you know, 100 people that wear Men in Black suits and, you know, kinda,
exactly.
Yeah, because that's what I
real life is just more subtle than that. You know, there are real ways this can go, and people keep telling me that folk are going to go to jail over this, and I can't imagine that they will. You know, folk, laws are for the poor, and no one involved in this is poor. I would say.
And if we attack, right? And I've been saying this for a long time, even from my conversations with Stephen Bassett, you know, I've told him this. We cannot go into this with pointing the finger and accusing and boldly saying that, you know, someone needs to answer for this in a criminal way. If we approach it that way, they're never giving us the answer, because they're not going to put themselves in jeopardy of being persecuted. So, we're going to have to meet the government halfway somewhere. And,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, they have all the good shit, all the good tech devices, you know, radar, infrared. They have that stuff. So we are going to need to meet them somewhere in order to advance this topic. So, you know, pointing the finger and threatening jail, that's not going to get us anywhere.
No, and I think that's why the legislation hasn't threatened jail so far. It's offered a carrot. You know, the stick is maybe a few years in our future, but for now, it's a very kind of conservative look. We're putting our hands up. We're saying that the people that made these decisions are probably not with us anymore, and actually, the people in charge of these programs have been patriots, and that's how they see themselves, and they see keeping the secret as a good thing. And for all we know, there's a genuine reason to keep the secret. You know, Tom DeLonge has alluded to, the more we're aware of them, the more they'll be here. And, you know, he threw a little funny kind of tweet out the other day kind of saying, yeah, it's no accident that all this is happening after I've kind of gone out into the world and seeded the idea. And it's a really curious thing if it's consciousness connected, more of the planet's becoming aware that, you know, we're probably not alone. And so we're getting a little bit further down that path.
I'd say more than 1% at this point think that know that we're not alone. Not just think it, but know it, right?
Yeah.
And to kind of skip over a little bit, there's been huge bipartisan support for funding of AARO. Do you think there's a possibility that this whole shoot down process could have been something to propel funding for AARO?
I would say probably not, just in the sense that
someone said it to me, and I was like,
AARO were ever tracking these. These were things that just came up when NORAD switched off their filters or broadened their filters. I've been told AARO weren't tracking these, so they were never kind of UAP in the way that AARO and us think of UAP. Right. However, we do need a program that's robust, and we do need a program that's outside of the purview of like ODNI or DOD that can actually bring all of the different government compartments together. So what's happened this past, 2 weeks, whether it was aliens or whether it was just balloons and was kind of embarrassing, it's cleared the data pile for us, and it's given all the politicians a lot of clarity about what we need to be doing. Because there's been a number of articles where they've spoken about like, we shot those UAP down. They were balloons maybe, or prosaic, or from China. But what about the ones that Obama said were moving in really erratic ways? Hey, what are they? We kind of need to track those and figure those out too, if this is what we're going to be doing. So I think they probably already have the money that they need to do this. And it's transparency and kind of that public conversation that needs to come to the fore. So while I kind of support the bipartisan push for it, I'm more of the mind that we don't necessarily need more money in there. We just need more transparency, because they can see these things. We've been told that they can see a baseball on radar from like 80,000 feet away. So I think it's a little disingenuous for them to argue that they just need more money to do that job. No, they just probably need to use the resources they already have effectively, and to have these legacy programs really opened up, because that would give us a huge boost.
That's a huge aspect of it, is these legacy programs. I think AARO needs to be fully briefed. We need to stop keeping these secrets, because maybe we weren't ready in the while the Cold War was happening. Maybe we weren't ready when World War II was happening. Maybe we weren't ready for certain things at certain times, because there was a lot of chaos. But I think the time is now where the population is a little bit more open to the idea. And I think the secrecy really developed out of religious standpoints. That's probably my opinion, right? A lot of people think that, even one of my co-hosts, I talked to him about CE5 and he's like, dude, you sound like you're summoning demons. It's like, no, that's not it. That's not the point. So do you think that a religious aspect would hinder the advancement of AARO and thus the conversation of UAP?
In a way, yeah, because it gives you a certain lens on the universe that, there's a big dude up there that's kind of making decisions, and humanity is special, and we were chosen, and nothing outside of here is under his purview. Right.
The only thing up there is heaven.
Exactly. But then you kind of get away from those extreme religious views. And, I've spoken to people, and I love to ask religious folk what's their idea of God, because they often go to the idea of the divine, and it often comes down to, when you look out into the universe, there is a force that created all this. We don't know what to call it, and therefore we call that God or divine. And I can get behind that, Same. It's kind of, what entered my head when I first heard the word Scientology. I was like, a religion based on science? No, that's not what that was.
That's so funny that you said that. I was like, dude, really? And then I found out what it really was, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, maybe we think the best of things. I did a similar thing when I found out about Flat Earth. I was like, a movement that kind of tells you to not do that kind of defers to authority bias, and to actually question the science and learn it for yourself. Again, no, that's not what they were going for.
Nope. Agenda's quite different. But I think every day. Actually, one second. Hold that thought. I'm gonna plug this in. I know we're gonna wrap up. But there you go. You plug this bad boy in. I used to use my Mac, like my desktop Mac, in this, but now that I've been able to do in-person podcasts again, there's no room for it. So
Sure.
I always forget to plug the laptop in while we're going. It always.
Well, the batteries last so long these days, right? That you just kind of like, oh crap, the battery's running out. It's a rare thing.
These two questions, I've pondered humans, and what I would say would be the beginning of thought. the beginning of vocalized conversation or intelligent thought. What happens after we die, and are we alone in the universe? These are two fundamental questions to, a conscious being. By solving one of these, right? By figuring out maybe we're not alone in the universe, and maybe we contact a species that's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ahead of us, and they have all the answers that we're looking for. So by solving one question, we solve both of them. That thought intrigues me, and I don't think it's the government's place, or I don't know who gave the authority to the government to hide that kind of stuff from us, if that is true, right? So that's where I get deeply offended by if a government did have these answers, did know who was visiting us, and they withheld it from us for 50, 60 years, 100 years, is that right? I mean, does someone need to pay criminally? I don't necessarily think so, but I mean, if it were to come out tomorrow that they did know, starting at Roswell, they did recover that craft. They've been in contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. All these wild claims that people have made, it's all true, right? Bob Lazar's story's true, all of it. Would you ever trust the government again?
That's a good question. And I mean, we don't trust the government now, right? And even whether we're talking about 9/11 or COVID and stuff like that. Go on.
Would people be so upset that the government basically, there was like a revolution? Do you think they're worried about
like
something
the institutions would just crumble?
Crumble, yes.
Quite possibly. There would be a reckoning because, like you said, they hid this information from us, and quite frankly, what gives them the right? I think we would be rethinking not only what it means to be human, but all of the structures about what it means to live a life, to relate to each other, to just be in that pursuit of happiness with each other. That our idea of how fulfilling a life could be would absolutely broaden. And chances are, we're already kind of going away from this. We went from very local to very global, and now we're all kind of pulling back to very local again because, those global supply chains kind of crumbled during COVID. So it's been a really interesting few years. And I think that would just be exacerbated by this knowledge. People would kind of form these small communities. Mm-hmm. Places like, Texas would probably just be like, yep, screw the government, we're off, we're just going to manage ourselves, because you've proven now that you really don't care about people's everyday lives. And they kind of remind me of, how sports teams are, where, they'll be like, oh yeah, the institution of Manchester United stands for XYZ. Yes. When there's no one person in that institution ever, maybe aside from the person who started the institution, who actually represents that institution. It's just this idea that gets away from people and may as well be an egregore. So we would reflect on that, and we would probably really limit, what the government could do. With the advancement of AI and things like that, we're already getting to a place where, universal basic income and things like that are going to have to come into the conversation, because life as we know it is changing. So it's kind of a nice little coincidence that life as we know it is changing as we're starting to ask about life as we don't know it, right? It's gonna really change our idea of what we are, what life is, what the meaning of life is, and what we're here for. Dude,
thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I hope this isn't going to be the last conversation, of course.
Oh, I'd love to come back. This has been extremely fun, and I love all your setup, especially your Captain America helmet. I have a nice little tattoo here. Nice.
Maybe you can't see it from this far away.
Amazing. I love it. See, tattoo buddies. Yeah, we'll definitely do this
Captain America. Yeah, man. Kurt hit me up when he was in New Hampshire. I didn't get to go, we were going to do a dinner or something. I didn't get to.
Cool.
I didn't get to do it, but if you're ever in the Boston area, New York is also acceptable. Let me know, and we can plan an in-person podcast. But I do want to kind of round out. What do you got going on? I know Phenomenology. You guys are working on the second season. We just had Vinny on a while back, and he was talking about it. So when can folks expect that? And what's going on? What do you got coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look for episodes of the podcast every week. We're always trying to get really interesting guests to come and talk about this subject.
You guys have the best. I mean, not to mention, I hate to say this, but I wanted to say it to you a while back. You guys are like what I would consider the Rogan of the UFO.
Oh, thank you, man.
Yeah, you guys. The podcast is so well done, so consumable for everybody. It's not just for this group or that group. It's anyone can listen to that UFO podcast and get something out of it. Your guests are amazing. Top tier, and just absolutely blowing me away with that content. So,
thank you, man. That means a lot. And like I said earlier, it's a total accident that it happened. It all kind of came together exactly when it needed to, and it's grown really organically. I love recording with Andy, and we both kind of come at this as well from different angles. And we're big believers in the fact that even though this is a huge subject and it's very intimidating, it doesn't mean you can't have a good time talking about it. And so we always try and kind of keep that in mind, as well as the fact that the UFO community is kind of a small community. There's almost 8 billion other people on the planet, and they're the people we need to talk to and bring on board. So everything we do, we try and keep those folk in mind. Whether it's just explaining acronyms instead of just saying,
right.
NDA or,
saying
AARO.
Department of Defense. Yeah.
Yeah. Things that like we're very accustomed to, but not many folk out there are if you're just not into this subject. And also keeping it short and concise and things like that, so that people can come pop in. There's a lot of creatives that I look up to that have sent me messages kind of saying, "Oh, I love listening to your show while I'm creating like comic books and things like that." That absolutely blows my mind. It's just very, very, very cool.
The only thing is Andy's accent is so thick that sometimes it gets to me. I'm like, all right, I got to take a little break. It makes me laugh though. He's a great guy. You guys are. So, when was the Phenomenology? I don't know if you said that.
Yeah, so Phenomenology Season 1, that's out. We released the first team meeting of everyone that's going to be in Season 2 on YouTube. So if you search Phenomenology on YouTube, you'll find that. And you'll kind of hear a bit about our plans and things like that. But Vinny and I are hitting Colombia for the 8th of April because it's Holy Week then. And that's when the lights on the mountain are said to be most active.
Oh,
so
shoot.
Before... We managed to capture a video of these lights that have been reported for thousands of years for the first time ever. And now we're going back with things like thermal drones and things like that, that if we see these things on the mountain, we can just get rid of the low-hanging fruit, kind of say, oh, look, that's not a person. We've scanned that with infrared or with thermals, and we can see that that's not a person. It's just a light. We're also going to be taking lights up the mountain and kind of, getting reference images and things like that to compare to what we filmed, as well as going to different places to kind of see how far back the legend goes with the indigenous folk. There's a lot of really interesting guests as well coming on for Season 2, from like musicians or esoteric people to people who just aren't really involved in the subject at all. So you're going to get so many different angles kind of coming at this. And one of my favorite parts of the whole Phenomenology experience when we were there was after dinner, just sitting around, having a few glasses of wine and just, talking about it and just looking at everybody's point of views, because we had someone who was just on the complete opposite side of the political spectrum to me last time, and they were the nicest person. So that was a learn that was kind of nothing to do with the phenomenon, but, it reminded me what it is to be human, and it's not arguing about politics, that's for sure.
It's not. And we definitely need to get past that. I think with that whole, with the Trump, I call it the Trump saga, that really, really divided the country into Democrat or Republican. And I think we need to get away from that and we need to get away from the whole country thing. Just because you're in China doesn't mean that, I'm better than you because I live in America or the United States or Ukraine or Russia.
I forget the Irish poet's name, but he said, just because I'm born in a stable, it doesn't make me a horse. And I think that's so true.
Exactly. That beats my point. And it's awesome to bring, to get together with like-minded people like yourself, and kind of explore these ideas in our own time, in our own way. So I can't thank you for all the work that you guys have done. You've paved the way for many more creators like myself to take that leap and to get on board. So just remember that you're doing the right thing, man.
Thank you, man. That means the world to me.
And you can find him on Twitter at The Signal. I think it is.
The Signal?
Right?
Yeah. Like The Signal, but with a Z instead of an S.
Yeah,
After
right
that movie we was talking about, The Signal, which was,
yes.
that was an intriguing film. But yeah, I recommend people go search that out. But yeah, The Signal with a Z instead of an S.
All right. And you got a new episode with Terry coming out, I heard.
So we've got an episode coming out with Terry Lovelace, also an episode with Bryce Zabel, where he expounds a little bit on what Ross said on the Need to Know podcast about the Air Force and the Navy butting heads, as well as talking about presidents and UFOs and what are the chances that Biden is going to be the disclosure president, He also goes into a little bit of what may have happened if Hillary won the election. And it's really interesting to listen to. So look out for those. And I'd also say tune into Ancient Aliens, wink. Soon enough, you might see someone familiar on there.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I heard. Thank you so much. I cannot wait for the next time because I still have pages of things I need to ask.
It's going to be awesome, man. Thank you so much. And I'll send you that shortcut as well for yourself and your listeners.
All right. See you guys next time.